There comes a moment in your inner journey that no one warns you about. It doesn't look like triumph. It doesn't feel like bliss. It feels like nothing. The goals you once chased feel meaningless. The people you once impressed don't excite you anymore. Even your own voice, so loud with ambition before, goes silent. You don't feel sad. You don't feel anxious. You just feel empty. And the world will tell you you're depressed, that something's wrong, that you need to fix it quickly. But what if I told you this isn't the sign of failure, but the beginning of awakening? You haven't lost your fire. You've just lost your illusions. And now that the smoke has cleared, what's left is a silence that feels unfamiliar. This is the stage no one talks about. The sacred void between the self you were taught to be and the self you are yet to meet. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." But here's the twist, that death is not the end. It's the start of something terrifying and beautiful, because what's emerging now is you. Not the version of you that chased praise, not the one obsessed with proving something, but the quiet self that no longer needs to pretend. You're not depressed. You're between two versions of yourself. And this silence you're in, it's not a failure, it's a threshold. There comes a moment in the psyche's unfolding when the scaffolding of who you thought you were begins to crack. Not from trauma, not from failure, but from something quieter, a truth that no longer hides beneath the noise, a recognition. You look around at the things that used to drive you, status, admiration, control, belonging, and something inside no longer stirs. The same music plays, but your soul no longer dances. And it's in this silence, this dissonance between your inner and outer world, that something begins to unravel. This is not depression, though it may feel like it. It's disillusionment, a gentle but devastating realization that much of what motivated you was built on borrowed scripts. What you called ambition was a need to be seen. What you called confidence was well-managed fear. What you thought was love was the hunger to be chosen. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with the persona, the mask you crafted to survive the world. A mask so carefully formed that you began to believe it was you. It smiled on cue. It achieved. It seduced. It obeyed. And it kept you safe. But now, in the quiet moments, that mask begins to itch. You feel it when a compliment lands flat, when an old fantasy no longer excites you, when success tastes like cardboard. You haven't lost your motivation. You've lost your illusions. And what most people call a loss of drive is actually the death of performance-based identity. This death is not celebrated, it is mourned, because for years the world rewarded you for wearing that mask. And now that you've outgrown it, you're left with no script, no applause, and no direction. This is the void, but the void is sacred, because only in that stillness, in that unbearable in-between, can you begin to hear your real voice. The one that isn't performing, the one that isn't begging for approval, the one that doesn't want to be enough, but simply be. Carl Jung warned of this stage not as pathology, but as necessity. He called it the midlife turning, the confrontation with the unconscious, where the energies that were once projected outward must be reclaimed, where desire is no longer a reaching out, but a returning in. And make no mistake, this loss of false desire is a kind of death, not of your life, but of the life you never truly chose. The borrowed goals, the mimicked beliefs, the admiration you thought was love, the ambition you thought was purpose. All of it burns away. And what's left? You, raw, unscripted, uncertain, but real. This is where individuation begins, not with triumph, but with loss, not with the acquiring of more, but with the shedding of what was never yours to begin with. It is the descent into shadow, not to suffer, but to reclaim. It is the end of who you were told to be, so you can finally meet the one you've always been. And so, if you find yourself here, hollow, unmoved, unsure, understand, this is not the end. It's the invitation to stop pretending, to stop running, to stop feeding the hollow desires that once kept you spinning, and to begin, for the first time, to listen to the quiet truth beneath the noise. you are not empty. You are being emptied because something deeper is trying to be born. We live in an age obsessed with purpose. Find your why, they say. Define your mission. Know your direction. It's dressed up as depth, but often it's just a new name for the same hunger to feel important, visible, irreplaceable. For most, purpose is never discovered. It's constructed. As children, we absorb it from the people we admire. As teenagers, we shape it to fit who we hope to be admired by. And as adults, we decorate it with meaning, but never question what it was made from. But eventually, you do. Eventually, something in you whispers, why am I chasing this? Who gave me this script? And suddenly, the purpose that once gave you energy starts to feel hollow. You try to keep moving. You double down. You distract yourself with busyness. But still, the glow is gone. This isn't laziness. It's not failure. It's awakening. Because here's what no one tells you. Most people don't want to find their purpose. They want to find a reason not to feel lost. Purpose becomes a drug, not to serve life, but to avoid the unknown. And when it collapses, you're left standing in front of that unknown, alone, silent, uncertain. This moment, this quiet loss of drive, is terrifying. You're not sad, but nothing moves you. You're not angry, but you feel unsettled. You're not empty, but you're still. And in this stillness, your mind panics. It says, I need a new goal, a new path, something to chase. But the deeper part of you knows, no, I need to stop chasing. Carl Jung wrote, we deem those happy who from the experience of life have learnt to bear its ills without being overcome by them. That includes the pain of purposelessness, because it is only by walking through this silence without immediately filling it that your true orientation can begin to take shape. You stop asking, what should I do? And begin asking, what's true in me now, without needing to be useful? And maybe the answer won't come quickly. Maybe it won't be loud. Maybe it won't impress anyone. But it will be yours. Purpose that arises after illusion isn't fast. It isn't shiny. It doesn't need to be branded or admired. It's a quiet pull toward alignment, not applause. It's no longer about saving the world or being extraordinary. It's about being honest, so deeply honest with yourself that you stop needing the story of purpose to feel alive. And ironically, it's there, in the refusal to perform, that your most meaningful work begins. So if you've lost your drive, your vision, your sense of direction, don't panic. It means something false is dying. Let it, because what's growing underneath isn't a goal. It's you. You spent years building a version of yourself the world could accept. You sharpened your wit, smoothed your rough edges, learned how to say the right thing at the right time to the right people. You became someone others liked, respected, admired maybe. But somewhere along the way, that version of you, the persona, as Jung called it, became too tight to live inside. It started as protection, a way to navigate the world without exposing too much. But now it feels like a mask that's melted onto your skin. You smile, but something in you isn't smiling. You agree, but something in you is silent. You succeed, and something in you stays empty. This is where the persona begins to die. And it doesn't go quietly, because the persona isn't just a role, it's your armor. When it dissolves, your ego panics. It says, without this, who am I? But that question is exactly the point. Most people spend their entire lives polishing their persona and calling it growth. But Jung warned, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege comes with a cost, your mask. The death of persona is not loud. There's no ceremony, no fanfare, just a series of quiet betrayals. When your soul starts refusing to play the part, you stop laughing when it's expected. You stop proving your worth to the unworthy. You stop apologizing for your truth. And you begin to feel strange, not broken, not enlightened, just raw. You're not performing, but you're not fully embodied. You're in the in-between, where you're no longer who you were, and not yet who you're becoming. This space is sacred, but it's also brutal, because no one teaches you how to live without the script. No one hands you the new lines. You're left in silence and expected to listen for a voice you barely recognize. And here's the hardest part. No one claps for this phase. You don't get praise for unbecoming. You don't get rewarded for no longer fitting in. You get solitude. You get doubt. You get 1,000 small ego deaths that make space for a self you've never met. And yet, what waits on the other side is something the persona could never offer. Wholeness. Not perfection, not power, but the quiet peace of no longer needing to lie, not to others, and not to yourself. This is not depression. This is honesty, turning inward. This is what happens when the soul grows tired of being seen and starts yearning to be known. Let the mask fall. The silence that follows may be the first true sound you've ever heard. The moment the persona begins to fall away, the psyche doesn't feel free. It feels exposed, unguarded. And this is where the old life, the mask, the roles, the illusion, calls you back. Not with force, but with familiarity. Suddenly, you remember how much easier it was to be liked, to chase what looked good, to perform just enough to feel safe. There's a deep temptation to return, to reattach yourself to your old names, goals, identities, not because they're true, but because they're known. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this is where they turn back. Because facing your soul is not poetic, it's painful. It means letting the illusion fully collapse without rushing to replace it. It means sitting in a space where there is no applause, no affirmation, no structure, just you, raw, unperformed, uncertain. This silence feels unbearable, not because it's empty, but because you're not used to being in it without a role. You begin to question everything. You ask, if I don't want what I used to want, and I no longer believe what I used to believe, what's left? And the mind hates that question, because it cannot answer it quickly. So it offers shortcuts. Old goals dressed as new ones. Old wounds rebranded as ambition. A new identity that still fits neatly within the system you've started to question. This is the trap. Spiritual rebranding instead of transformation. You shave off the edges of your awakening and call it balance. You return to the chase, but this time with a quote in your bio and incense in your room. You rebuild the cage, just with softer walls. But deep down, the soul knows you've turned back. True individuation demands you stay in the discomfort longer than you want to resist the reflex to redefine yourself too quickly, to sit in the unknown and not fill it. And most won't, because it's easier to feel important than it is to feel invisible. Easier to be certain than it is to be whole. But if you can stay, if you can resist the urge to perform, explain, rebuild, you'll start to notice something subtle. The silence becomes softer, the stillness becomes familiar, and the sense of emptiness begins to feel like space, not a void to run from, but a womb. Because this isn't where things end. This is where something true begins. You were taught to fear the empty spaces in life, to fill them with noise, ambition, identity, purpose. And when those began to fall apart, you thought something was wrong. But nothing is wrong. What you're experiencing is not depression. It's the slow undoing of what never belonged to you. It's the moment your old desires no longer fit. The personas you perfected begin to fracture, and the ego, once inflated by performance, is finally forced to sit still, not in defeat, but in surrender. You're not failing. You're no longer pretending. You're not lost. You've stopped following maps that led you away from yourself. This stage of the journey isn't glamorous. It's not packaged in success or certainty. It comes with silence, solitude, and the terrifying freedom of no longer needing to be who you were. And yes, your ego will panic. It will beg for roles, stories, control. But as Jung puts it, the ego must acknowledge many gods before it attains the center of the self. Carl Jung, Mysterium Conjunctionis. You must meet the forces within you, your fear, your desire, your rage, your softness, and see that none of them are the whole. You must learn to stand at the center of all your contradictions and not run. The goal of the individuation process is the synthesis of the self. This means the ego must recognize that it is subordinate to a higher authority. Carl Jung. That authority is not outside you, it is within. It is the self, not as fantasy, but as foundation. Not as escape, but as integration. And when you begin to live from that center, you stop reaching, you stop proving, you stop abandoning yourself in the name of who you think you should be. You don't return to your old fire, you ignite a quieter one that doesn't burn for recognition, but for truth. So if you feel like something is dying, let it. Because the self that's born after illusion is not an upgrade, it's a homecoming.